Dark Souls 1's case, where you have to use the JKL keys to look around. That was hellish, to say the least.
Hello guys! To gain insight into the sinister machinations of my fellow Souls players, I have decided to interview a randomly selected sample. Please welcome Gideon the Halfknowing! So, what do you call yourself and where can people find you?
I use Gideon the Halfknowing online. It's a name that I was very inspired to take after beating Elden Ring and being like, Gideon the All-Knowing. I feel like I could, reach half of that title. Usually, I am most active on, YouTube by now. I used to be more active on Twitter, but ever since everything with the current muskrat landscape started, I sort of dropped out. I just post a lot of content on YouTube, either on Gideon the Halfknowing, which is like a personal channel for Let's Plays and little info dumps of videos for lore. And then I have a podcast called Elden Kings, which is, same name, Elden Kings and Elden Ring discussion. And that's just a fun little channel I have where we get all sorts of guests in the community on.
You just have a name that you just really want to scream.
Yeah, no one likes Gideon, the all-knowing in Elden Ring.
The only good thing he brought to the table is his introduction in the opening cinematic.
Yeah, it was very energetic. We appreciate the narrator for that.
Yeah, it's great. What was your first From Software game?
Okay, so this is sort of like a technicality, and it's sort of funny, because I was, I'm gonna out myself with my age, but I'm not, I'm pretty young as far as the Soulsborne community goes. So I was 11 when I bought Dark Souls 1, and I promptly returned it, because I was just dying to the graveyard skeletons over and over.
Classic.
Yeah. So 3 years go by. It's 2014 or something. Dark Souls 2 releases, and I really liked Dark Souls 2. I thought it was quite nice. And that was, I'd say, my technical first game. I played through it for 60 hours or whatever. I used a terrible build. It was like a mage build with the bare requirements to cast magic, so I had no good scaling. And then I had 35 strength, so I could use a great shield for some reason,
Okay, that's not something you hear often, but it seems to be very emblematic that everyone has this first time experience where they just put it down afterwards and then they get back into it. That seems to be a running theme.
Yeah, I think that's where, you always have those prepare to die, get good memes, especially in the older community. And I think that the older games with their jank, it was just very easy to bounce off of them if you were more used to hack and slash games where you could just get hit by a bunch of things and be fine, like Diablo or Skyrim on lower difficulties. So I think it was just sort of a wake-up call to certain... It was for me, at least. I got my butt kicked,
Yeah. I can certainly empathize with that. What made you pick it up?
I've always been into fantasy, so I think it was mostly just the fantasy kick. I saw ooh, cool trailer, cool cover art. This is fantasy medieval game. But after beating Dark Souls 2, I sort of got into the lore, I talked about it with my friends at the time. Naturally, Vaddy was so big at the time, so I got into his content on YouTube. Epic Name Bro, I liked his Let's Plays, and that sort of inspired me to look at the Soul series with a deeper, deeper understanding, I guess. I always liked to read, but I never sort of took that academic reading skill and applied it to video games, because they were just fun little things. And then it was sort of that wake up, oh wow, video games can cross that threshold into being art where they can really interest you at that deeper level. And it's that combined with a deep appreciation for the nuance of the combat and gameplay that really kept me coming back.
Yeah, Dark Souls is a game that I say demands focus at some points at least.
Oh, yeah.
Where it actually just makes you invested and not just a side thing you do while listening to podcasts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What made you like them? What hooked you?
Yeah, so it's the lore was the big thing, like I mentioned. The gameplay and the PvP are they're not to be understated, though. I have a lot of hours in Dark Souls 2 because it was my first game. I couldn't afford the other games, and not many of them were out at the time. So I just kept going back to that one, and I had maybe 500 hours in it across Vanilla and Scholar of the First Sin, but half of that is just PvP. I was very drawn in by the in-depth customization, the way that each battle could evolve, how different player mentalities would affect that. That level of gameplay depth is there in like all of the From Software games. Like Sekiro and Elden Ring are such a joy to play against the high-level difficulty stuff, just because it's very engrossing to try and do. Like I've been playing Armored Core 6 even, and that's like reminding me of Dark Souls 2's PvP and how slow and methodical it can be, and how many builds can exist and then like counter each other, which is interesting.
I would not describe Armored Core 6 as slow and deliberate, to be honest.
That's so valid. Okay, that's actually a very good point. It's like a mix. Like, okay, so it is super fast-paced, super high octane, especially if you've got like a melee build and you're just like sticking to your opponent, which is great. You know, it has that Sekiro energy. But there's also this, like, if you play the earlier Souls games, I'd say, like, pre-Bloodborne, there's a huge amount of importance on your positioning.
Yeah.
That importance is still there in Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring in the later games, but you can sort of ram your head into a wall to be okay if you have bad positioning. You know, like Dark Souls 3, if you time your dodges, then your positioning doesn't matter as well. But, like, Dark Souls 1, if you position badly, you'll just die.
Yeah.
I think Armored Core 6 is like, you can do like the whole dodging thing, but like if you know your positioning, if you know how to just like float above people all like cool, you can play it very slowly and methodical where you're just like raining hell from above, which I think does that make sense? Maybe I'm just like
it makes sense,
weird.
Yeah. I know what you mean, especially the lack of iframes, I think, contribute to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if you run out of energy and you can't dodge, and then someone just blasts you with both of their back launcher missiles, like, you will very much pay for that. And
yeah, you're just dead.
Literally. I think I've done, like, 4,500 damage to someone in PvP with that kind of, like,
Jesus
build. It's
Christ.
just nuts. Yeah, it's like a third to half of your health.
Yeah, that's just bye-bye. Let's continue. What is your focus when you play these games? Like PvE, PvP, challenge runs, or like lore hunting?
Oh god, I'm such a nerd. I sort of love that whole like immersive experience where you get to just be like, yes, I am fully into this game. The lore hunts and the embracing of the challenge gameplay-wise is there, but it's almost as if those combine into something that becomes like an immersive sim type game, like an RPG, where you get all of these abilities and you use them to define a character and their story within the game story. When I played Elden Ring, I didn't really use the map much. I liked to think I was some sort of like knight errant that was riding from road to like across the roads from castle to castle, you know, doing quests. And that's my big focus when I first do my blind playthroughs, you know? But then later on it becomes very much like challenge runs and lore hunting and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. Do you make up lore for most of your characters or just first run?
Generally, like, I'll have, like, most of my character archetypes, like, I'll have, like, a name that's somewhat, like, flavorable. You know, like, sometimes I'll give someone, like, the name, like, Smithy, like, John, like, Smithy John, I don't know, some stupid, like, regular-ass name. But, like, a lot of the time I'll give them something, like, medieval fantasy sounding, and I'll imagine a sort of, like, oh, how do they fit into the backstory of this game? How do they interact with all of these tropes? Because that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say that I do it for most of my characters. Yeah.
Yeah, I start doing that, but I don't pull through. I just get absorbed into the gameplay. And I think there's this phrase coined by Rusty, I think, where it's like, either you die a mage or you live long enough to see yourself become a knight, which very much applies to me.
I can empathize. It's like, magic is fun. It's talked about as being, you know, OP, quote unquote, but I've always found that hitting someone with a sword is the most effective manner of playing the games.
Yeah. In terms of PvP, you mentioned you were doing that a bit. Are you more of the duelist or invasion type?
I'd say generally duelist. I did a lot of Iron Bridge stuff in Dark Souls 2, and later on, like, Pontiff Sullivan, Aldrich Faithful, which is sort of like towing the line of an invasion, but it so often happens into like a fight club type
Yeah.
thing. But like, I certainly do like invasions. I think my biggest thing with it is that like I'm a casual player, to be honest. I'm very good at fighting PvE bots that don't think, but like a lot of my tactics I think are very readable. So I can do very well in certain circumstances, like Elden Ring PvP when it first released and when the arena released. I was stomping a lot of the players, but then as the like casual player base dwindled and you got left with a bunch of people that actually played fighting games and knew like technical abilities and like they were meeting poise calculators, like that's where I start to fall off. So invading has always been difficult for me because I'm just not good enough to really get the enjoyment of winning or interacting with like a good battle with people. But I do quite like to watch like invasion content. I think Saint Riot is one that like a name that comes to mind just because
Yeah.
I sort of enjoy his longer format videos.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Then, what were some of your most memorable moments with these games?
Ooh, okay. I guess one from Elden Ring that was pretty recent was that, like you asked earlier, like how into the lore I was. And when I first played Elden Ring, by the time I was leaving Leyndell after killing Morgott and like had all of the stuff about Destined Death being leaked, I figured out that I was going to go fight Malekith, Like, I got to Fair Missoula and I was like, oh, okay, Malekith must be here. I wonder where he is. And then I get to the boss arena and I'm like, Gurrank is Malekith? What? Like, sort of a cool little reveal that wasn't entirely meant to be a reveal, I feel like, but...
Yeah, Malekith just wiped the floor with me in my first playthrough. Jesus
Oh,
Christ.
he's so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest, I did not think about the lore at this point. I was just trying to survive.
You had your nose to the grindstone. You were like, let me beat you, game, please.
Yeah. It's like, I'm a veteran. I should be good at this.
I will admit that once I got to Godskin Duo, I was like, oh, ho, ho, I see what you're doing, Miyazaki. And I immediately went and leveled a Spirit Ash for the first time in my playthrough, because I was like, I'm not dealing with this.
Yes.
I'm curious, what's your most memorable moment in the games?
Oh god, that's a hard question.
It is,
I'm asking the questions here. No, I think there are a couple invasions where it's like triple bluffing, but I can't like explain it well enough here. That just come to mind. Where it's just two people try and outsmart each other, and sometimes I came out on top, sometimes I did not.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, one thing. It wasn't recently, but it was back when the servers were offline. On the private servers, cheating was a bit more lax. I mean, it's lax in general, but yeah. So there was someone making a boss out of himself. So he had scripts and everything and a health bar and automated attacks and everything, and that was just amazing to see what people can do when just you were in front of the Pontiff, like in the Pontiff arena, and there was like a countdown with particle effects over his head to when this fight starts and stuff like that. That was just insane to me.
Yeah, I'm almost wishing that there was, like, you had footage left over of that, because that sounds really, that sounds very memorable to experience.
Sadly, I don't have footage, but I think there's footage out there of people doing that. I could look that up and maybe get something in the background.
Okay, yeah, I'd love that. I love the fan community around the Souls games. Like, I'm not sure how many other in-depth sort of like simulations of a boss you could find in other multiplayer games that was just hacked in,
Yeah, it's just this community it has its rough edges, right? But I think it's one of the most dedicated, and if you look past a few things, one of the just most wholesome communities out there. I know the whole Git Good thing, but I just love this place. It's also why I make these community interviews, because, well, we have things in common, we don't have things in common, but let's share it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a very similar mindset for my Elden Kings podcast, where the main format I do for it, like it does a lot of different things, but the main format is that I just have a lot of different guest stars on from other places in the content creating community. And sometimes you'll have very different opinions sometimes. Like I've had people on that like hated the end of Elden Ring, while I'm one of those people that is like, yeah, the end of Elden Ring is great and it's a deliberate screw you to make sure that you know that you're good enough to beat the game, you know? I am an honorable, not honorable, but like I am I will defend Elden Beast to my grave.
Yeah, no, I don't agree. that fucking thing I hate it.
Yeah, I love how like we can have these divisive like opinions and then like still just like have fun with it, you know?
Yeah,
Because it's very cool to show those different sides of the community.
played and overdone hatred can be very fun. Like the whole Dark
Yeah,
Souls 2 thing.
yeah, like even Dark Souls 2 enjoyers will shit on Dark Souls 2, you know? It's fun.
Oh, it is.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay, let's continue. What is your favorite game in the series?
Okay, I think it's Sekiro.
Mhm.
Elden Ring is a close second, but there's a couple things with Elden Ring that just naturally don't jive with me. Like, I appreciate the ambition of making an open world game at the scale that Elden Ring is. And truthfully, I don't think that there's many other games that have comprehensively tried to depict human nature when it comes to religion and governance as well or as in depth as Elden Ring does. So it's like, I've got a lot of respect for it there. But as far as like personal enjoyment goes, I just like look at Sekiro and I'm like, I like to be Zoomy Ninja Shinobi, and like the dopamine receptors activate, so it just like it all comes together in that game for me. I really like the story, and I really like the fresh take of like a Japanese medieval game,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Like alternate Middle Ages than just like typical Western fantasy is nice.
So what you're saying about Elden Ring, if I get you right, is that they should have put their foolish ambitions to rest. Okay, sorry,
Yes,
that
precisely.
just had to. Sorry.
I'm glad you did.
What is your least favorite game?
Okay. You might crucify me for this. And I don't think that it's like not least favorite game in the sense that I hate it. I think it's a step above most games out there that I've played. But it's Dark Souls 3. Um,
Okay.
I I like it a lot. I think that the idea of a sort of fast-paced apocalyptic game that takes a lot of cues from Bloodborne is really cool. And it's a game that like Sekiro and Elden Ring couldn't exist without the growing pains that occurred during Dark Souls 3. So there's a lot of appreciation there. I even really like how much it references back to the previous games. Like it's not made with the same design philosophy of as the other games is the thing though. Like every other game in the series has taken the concept of Western medieval fantasy, or Eastern medieval fantasy in Sekiro's case, and they've like spun it around into something that tries to do something unique within the overall tones of the series. Like Demon Souls is the first attempt. Dark Souls 1 is like really getting into the light versus dark philosophy. Dark Souls 2 is just edgy Dark Soul of Man stuff. It's the second least favorite because of that, because it really doesn't have much to say overall, but it does have a very good personal narrative going. But then like Dark Souls 3 very much feels like it's a weird amalgam of Bloodborne and Souls, where it doesn't want to say anything new. It's really just testing the waters and finishing the Souls series. So it's a really solid game, but the fact that it is, I don't know, it feels basic. Like I like it a lot, but I feel like even with Dark Souls 2, I'll be playing it and I'll be like having an appreciation of all of these like weird janky systems because for some reason I like to feel pain from video games, and then I'll be like playing Dark Souls 3 and I'll be like, okay, press B, press B, press B, dodge, 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 and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I can see where Dark Souls 3 seems a bit sanded down in this respect. And lore-wise, I can see that there are a couple things that just go nowhere. Fucking, what's her name?
Oh, Yorshka.
Yorshka, yeah. That is a lore black hole, or the deep or something. It just goes nowhere. But I think you were saying that it doesn't have something to say, but I would disagree there. Where I think, I don't want to make this a whole discussion, but I think it has something to say about letting go. First of all, yes, the Souls series, but every single ending is like, or like the worst ending, from my perspective in the game, is where you kindle the fire again. Everything else is just offering alternatives.
Yeah, definitely.
And the painted world and everything, I think it's just a thing about letting go, not holding on to something that you don't feel any artistic vision anymore. Something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Like all of the themes in the DLC with the painting are very explicitly like being like, go find a new game to play. You know.
Go play Bloodborne.
Yeah, I agree. I think it does have a. I don't mean to say that it doesn't do anything new in terms of like themes, just like in terms of like trying to buck the trend of what the game systems are doing and saying, I guess, because it's like finality is different and it does have its own context of being the last game in a series that has been drawn out past the first one when it never wanted any sequels, like the director never wanted sequels. But then it also is like all of the Dark Souls games are also about finality too. So it's like it's new, it's fresh, but it's also recycled. And
yeah, I
that's
see
even part of the theme too, that like everything is recycled. So like maybe Miyazaki should come beat me up for slandering him, but
Miyazaki 5D chess. He always wins.
He really does.
Follow-up question to that is, what would have to change about Dark Souls 3 for you to appreciate it more?
Ooh, okay, that's an interesting question, because I think there's a lot of different ways you could take it. Like, I think, okay, another unpopular opinion of mine is that I do think that Elden Ring took a lot of the growing pains that Dark Souls 3 had, and it sort of like, I won't say perfected them, but it did, I think, bring them closer in line with the developer vision. Where in Dark Souls 3, you know, you can just roll in any direction, and the iframes are long enough that you will be able to survive. You know, like you can literally just like roll into a boss over and over, timing it, and it doesn't matter where you are positioning-wise.
That is true.
But like Elden Ring at the late game bosses, like it doesn't matter how good you are at timing rolls. If you're fighting Malekith or Godfrey or Radagon, you have to know where you should be for the fight, you know? And I think that intensified boss AI and boss combat system can really bring out this, like what Dark Souls 3 was lacking in a way. And I think that's why Nameless King is such a popular boss, or like you that champion Gundyr, because in a lot of ways there's sort of like the proto idea of what's happening in Elden Ring. But they're very hard because of that, you know? I guess one direction would be like, if we had more bosses like that and more attention to detail in the gameplay systems, that could help. But I almost think I would have... I know, like, they couldn't do this because they needed to test out the new systems to make the later games work. But if they had made a game that tried to return to the roots of Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls, where poise tanking with heavy armor was a legitimate strategy, I would have really enjoyed that. Like, we haven't really gotten heavy armor builds that are super viable since Dark Souls 1, and it's something that... Dark Souls 1's really easy if you just go full Havels and beat stuff to death with a club. Like, it's insanely easy. People undervalue how easy it is. And they don't want to... Literally, yeah. Like, I don't want to understate that, I just think that it's a fun thing to allow in gameplay. So if Dark Souls 3 either went, let's make it harder in terms of positioning, or let's make it slower so that poise tanking is more of an option as compared to rolling, I would have appreciated either of those directions. But really, I'm happy with what we got, even if it is my least favorite. It's, you know, I like that they tried something like that. I can appreciate that at the very least, you know?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting take, and I think it's valid. Yeah. It's not what I think, because, okay, my first game was Dark Souls 3, so I may be a bit biased. And it's where I spend most of my time, even now that Elden Ring is out, because the PvP, in my opinion, is just still the best there. But what you brought up about the world and the gameplay systems, I think is valid. Like, stuff like Vagrants or stuff like that, where it's like experimental, they just didn't do that in that game. And I kind of miss that.
Yeah, they were playing it really safe.
Yeah. I think they just wanted to make the definitive version of Dark Souls where it's like everything we learned, but nothing more.
Yeah. No, like there's like cases with the Nameless City, for instance, where it's Like, a lot of the stuff that's happening in the Nameless City was stuff that was set up in Dark Souls 1 with some of Kath's dialogue, like, oh, human history has been obfuscated by Gwyn to control them. That doesn't suggest the existence of the Ring City, but it suggests what the Ring City is showing us in the history. So it's like, a lot of the stuff that happens in Dark Souls 3 is like, oh, this thing was vaguely mentioned in Dark Souls 1, but people didn't fully pick up on it. Let's make it 10 times as obvious so that they
Yeah.
know what's going on.
It's payoff in a sense.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, interesting. What platform and input method do you use?
So I've played on PC for most of my life. I got a PlayStation 5 for the Demon Souls remake though, so I played Elden Ring on that. For Souls games, I've pretty much only really used a controller plugged into my computer. I have played, for some reason, Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 on keyboard and mouse, or on just keyboard. In Dark Souls 1's case, where you have to use the JKL keys to look around. That was hellish, to say
Oh
the
god.
least.
That's like old Armored Core type shit.
Yeah, literally.
Oh god. Yeah, poor soul.
I don't know why I did it. I think I was on vacation from school and I didn't have a controller at the time for whatever reason. I was like, I want to play Dark Souls, and I was like, I'm good enough at it to make this work. It was harder than I expected it to be, to say the least.
Yeah, I can see that. Jesus Christ. No comment, actually.
We'll leave that for the comment section.
Yes. Do you use Xbox or PlayStation?
I used Xbox when I was younger. I've sort of grown to appreciate PlayStation controllers more, so that's usually what I go for, especially since I own like a PlayStation now.
Yeah. The Bloodborne and Demon Souls machine, at least for me.
Literally, like actually, those are the main games that I played for so
Same.
long.
Do you think that the Souls games are hard? The classic
Ooh.
question.
Yeah, that's spicy. Okay, they're definitely hard. You know, if you try to approach them from like a very casual perspective, where you think that the game will just like let you win or like guide you to the ending, then you're gonna be in for a surprise. But at the same time, playing Halo on the hardest difficulty, or doing endgame Monster Hunter content, or God of War on the hardest difficulty, all of those games have jankiness where you're like fighting the game to make it work, or where the game's just super mean to you. And I think because of that, in my opinion, they're much harder games than Souls. Even a lot of like Metroidvanias, like Blasphemous, feel harder to me than Souls, which I think is partly because I just am used to the action RPG format by now. But I also think that it's like, when you play a Souls game, you really feel like the developers want to push you towards winning, you know, especially in the later games. Like, if you get stuck somewhere, you can go somewhere else, level up, get more powerful, get more experienced, and you can go back and feel more confident, you know? There's usually a way to trivialize a boss. But when if you go to, like, some of its imitators, not imitators, I don't think that's a good word for it, games like Neo, where Neo just wants to kick your ass. They do not want you to beat the game. You know, I don't know if you've played that series, but it's
Not
just,
yet, no.
yeah, I don't know. It's like, so ultimately, I think that the Souls games are hard, yes, but I do think that their difficulty is overstated, and that there's a lot of nuance in the details where you really can get pushed towards beating the game in an easier manner than some of its contemporaries, I guess.
Yeah, like Dark Souls 1, I think there's no boss that cannot be cheesed.
Yeah, literally. Like the heavy armor, if that fails, you have bows, you have magic. Like, there's so many different
Yeah.
ways to do it.
Good old Capra Demon Firebomb. Well, it's something I appreciate, because if it's too hard for you, there's always information that can make it easier, not just skill. You can just go online and just look up, hey, cheese for this boss, and it's over.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you're playing Bloodborne, like, the easiest build for the game is Arcane, and it's because not only are your damage numbers generally higher, but you can get them even higher than that by just using the appropriate weakness, fire or lightning, against the area where they're weak to it. And
Yeah.
like, knowing that game knowledge, how to prep your weapon, how to use it effectively, that will make such a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I have to say, the first 2 hours of Bloodborne with an arcane build are just pain if you go all out arcane.
Yeah,
Jesus, I
until
hate.
you have to get through Gascan and who else before you get that first fire gem. Oh, you got to do the Bloodletting Beast and
Yeah.
Gascan before. Yeah,
Like,
definitely takes
flamethrower
a
is your
skill.
only arcane option until then, and it's just, yeah, no. How much do you engage with the Souls community?
Um, that's sort of a weird question. Like, not a weird question, but I have a weird answer to it. Where a year ago, before I sort of got into the idea of podcasting, I think I watched more YouTube videos on it, like while I was just driving or playing a game or whatever. But then now that I'm in the content creating part of it, I'm still like watching videos, but a lot of the time I'll be watching it because I'm like, oh, this person's cool. I want to see what they've been up to, rather than, oh, what's this like lore detail about, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's more, I'm much more here for the social aspect of it with people rather than like the content aspect of it, even if the content aspect still exists in a strong degree and like as like a unifying conversation thing, I guess.
Yeah, I know what you mean, where it's like more like a clique now than when you were just observing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, then, a follow up question. Is there anything you would want to tell the Souls community at large? Anything, advice, something you've picked up over the years playing these games? Just in general.
Ooh. Um. Oh man.
You
Oh
can take your
no.
time.
Okay. If I had like any one message, I feel like it just approaching these games. Oh god, it's so cheesy. Use an open mind, you know? When you approach any new thing, there's gonna be that degree of how many preconceived biases do you bring to the table that will impact how you interact with the game. And I see a lot of people, like Elden Ring had this really strongly, where people went into it, they wanted to use one weapon for the entire game, and they chose maybe a weapon that wasn't super useful in every circumstance, you know? Like, already you want to switch up weapons just because there's different good uses for different circumstances, but like when you choose like a not great weapon, like a great sword at launch, you really like lock yourself into a box where you're going to ruin a lot of those early times with it, I feel like. But if you try to approach it with an open mind where you're willing to try out all of the different gameplay systems, where you're willing to learn about what the game is trying to get you to do rather than trying to force what you want to do on the game, you can have a lot more enjoyment with the systems and what will come out of it. And I think that that open-mindedness is just good for interacting with the community around it and the lore and the story as a whole, because it's like with the lore and everything on like the analysis side, there are multiple answers for different questions, especially in Elden Ring. It's designed to have it so that you can't have a concrete answer. You could make a very good timeline, but you could make 5 different timelines that all have probably like similar lack of plot holes. And having that open mind to be able to accept all of these timelines as something intentional by the game to make a thematic undertone to the story, I think is important. Understanding the story, I suppose. So really, if you want to really enjoy these games, and I think a lot of media in general, approaching it with an open mind where you try to understand the authorial intent is very helpful for that, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. That was well said.
Thank you.
One more question that you were not briefed on beforehand, and dex or strength?
Well, Dax, you know, I
Oh.
appreciate only Afro. I'll proudly say that I leveled Dax. Yeah, that's mostly a joke. I like quality builds, actually. I like men
Same.
and women.
I'm also a quality enjoyer, but souls only.
You know that feeling when you're at a bar and, you know, someone nudges you and they're like, hey, do you think that's a quality build? Enjoy, you know?
I have not had that experience yet, but I think it would be interesting. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I was sort of stoked to have another person invite me to a thing. So, yeah.
No, it was great.
I quite appreciate it. It was. You'll have to come on my podcast sometime, you know, reciprocal.
Anytime. Anytime.